Okay, Ashley and Brian here, doing a little sudden chat about concluding our work in this course and kind of looking at the final module discussion topics for our final reflection. And we are going to start, at least, by specifically addressing part of our topics. So we're just going to see where this goes.
Yeah. So one of the final questions was, if you were teaching this course, what would you do differently?
Okay, so for me, I actually have thought about this because I was actually thinking about saying this before I knew this was a question. So I had actually already had this like percolating. So I have an idea, and I'm curious to hear someone else who's in this course think about it this way. So I should preface this by saying I'm in 3 other courses right now, and they're all online. I know. Brad said I was a glutton for punishment. So one of the courses I'm in is a leadership and education course, and it's all online and it's all individual, but once a week we meet in Zoom for like 5 minutes. I mean, it's super, super, super short to be like, you're doing this reading and you're doing this reading and you're doing this reading. And yet that 5 minutes a week has actually made me feel more connected with the people in that course whose work I know nothing about than a lot of the people in 5340 whose work I know a lot about, but who I don't really know anything about personally. So I was thinking, well, how could we combine those together? Because it would be nice to have both. People in the course with whom you feel somewhat connected and also feeling like you can see their work and grow from it. And I was also thinking about how this course is, despite the fact that it's about like digital tools and innovating, it's actually pretty traditional in its structure because it's very linear. Mm-hmm. Everyone in the class is doing week 1, then week 2, then week 3. And people have definitely made notes in weeks about, oh, this kind of speaks back to this concept from a couple weeks ago, but we're never like spiraling back.
Right.
And so I thought, well, how could we do that? So if I were to do this course, regardless of like content or things I would change, the structure that I would change is I would have everyone in the course be in like a triad where they're with 2 other people. So let's say that Brian and Ashley and Sheena, just someone else from our class, are in a triad. And everyone would do the first week together, just so we get our feet wet and understand. But then, instead of referring it to like week 2, week 3, week 4, it would be unit 2, unit 3, unit 4. In the second week of class, basically everyone would start participating in the course asynchronously. So I would do unit 2 on multimodality, and you would do unit 3 on copyright left, and Sheena would do unit 4, which I wouldn't have be remix week, I'd have be something else. And we would meet like early-ish in the week. We'd still do assignments, we'd still do daily grades and all of that. We'd still do critiques. But we'd meet early in the week and we'd kind of teach each other a little bit about our unit for the week. And we'd give each other like a rundown on our readings that we'd done so far. And just kind of to get each other thinking about all of the units, the perspective of our work. And in our reflections for the week, we would need to then go back to a point made by our classmates and think about our class work beyond just our own personal unit we're interacting with, but also the ones from other people in the class. And then the next week, we'd all move on by 1 unit. So I'd move on to unit 3 and you'd move on to unit 4 and Sheena would move on to unit 5. So the people who were then in a unit that had already been done, like I'm doing unit 3, you did it last week, right? My job would be to go back and look at your work and the work of other people who did and take it deeper and like to commentate or annotate on your work, and you wouldn't be responsible to comment back on that because that would be like 2 sets of annotations. But my work would be to look at what you've done and to try to make even more of it or go to a new place with it or expand on it. So then in our meeting, whoever's in the new unit would kind of tell us what's coming, and then people who are kind of taking stuff deeper would talk about the discoveries they made or the discussions that came up. And then eventually the person who's like in front is going to wrap back around
Right.
everyone will have done everything once. But I thought that was in my head, it made me feel like, okay, we'd be able to connect more with other people. And I guess you could always mix the groups up halfway through or something. But you'd also be kind of forced to really think more about how all of these kind of modalities or themes really interplay with one another, instead of just kind of stacking on top of each other, which is how it has felt somewhat in this class.
Now, in this model that you're thinking about, would it be that it would be the discussion triad, their hypothesis threads, presuming they're using hypothesis, of course, or I guess any different media for annotating or discussion, would it just stay local to just that triad, or would it be open to the whole class?
So I was thinking that their meetings would be just them, but then the actual annotations like hypothesis would be the whole class. So which would be a little bit messy, I think, but you'd only be responsible for keeping up with the annotations of the unit that you're in currently. So you might end up getting a whole lot of like email notification, but you're just kind of ingesting 1 week at a time.
I think the only problem I see with this, and this is not a problem this is the same problem that we currently have, but in a different kind of way, is as you would get towards like the end, in that 7th and 8th week, and you have all of these fully fleshed out ideas and every single rabbit hole has gone down. By the time you get there, you're going to have a hard time saying anything but I agree. Or I disagree.
Right.
And again, that's not a problem just distinct to this model you're talking about. We have that problem right here, right now in this as well, but that's only for people who get to the readings really, really late in the game. And then, like you and I went down a message thread that had just response after response, and somebody chirped in it to the end, like, that's a really interesting thread. I'm like, they had nothing left to say because you and I went back and forth the whole time.
Right. Yeah, you're right. And I don't really have an answer for it. I was thinking that I would kind of structurally move the remix week to later, so that if you kept it the same, that there'd be more content to deal with, but that maybe you would also kind of mess with that structure, though I didn't really think about what that would look like.
Yeah, I think I really like that idea, and in the same regards you were talking about, because it allows you to start pulling in connections with your previous readings that somebody else wouldn't have already had. So it gives you the opportunity to be the local expert on a topic. The downside of that from the instructor's perspective, of course, would be you have a whole lot of different readings and media you have to keep checking in on. Hypothesis makes it easy because you can aggregate it all together as long as people keep using the hashtag. But if you have them annotating on a video, and hypothesis doesn't really fit that, But overall, I do like a lot of the features that structure brings forth. And you're absolutely right about one of my, it's not a criticism, that's too strong of a word, but one of the things I noticed, there we go, it's a better word. One of the things I noticed about the class is there's definitely less of a feel of community. Like, you're the first person I've talked to in this entire class here, right now.
Sheena and Brad in a podcast, but besides that, yeah.
Right. And I guess that would have been my opportunity right there, would be to talk in one of the podcasts, but it wasn't working out scheduling wise. Whereas I guess if I were required to interact with people specifically in a triad or meet with a group, I would have budgeted time away for that because I had to as a requirement of the course, But yeah, I don't know anybody else in the class, and there are still names that pop up on Twitter. Like just this past week, a name popped up on Twitter, and I thought, is this person in this course? I don't think I've ever seen that handle before.
Right. But like I said, like there are lots of people who I see their work.
Yeah.
I see their work in the Twitter feed, or I see annotations that they make, but they have a different handle than they do on Twitter or something. And so I identify with like the content of the person, which arguably maybe is better. Yeah. But there is a certain like lack of human element that makes it a little harder. I know Brad said this course can feel very isolating, and I was surprised by that, for how immersed in tools it is. It has an isolating quality. So and maybe this is a good segue into what you were talking about, because I think, especially thinking about how could this course be used with different audiences than graduate students? That's something where I think, well, I think making it somewhat more personable might be really important for some of those audiences.
Oh, it absolutely would. Like here, we're all, at least in theory, we all behave like adults, and we can take that initiative for ourselves. But that is a perspective of andragogy. You know, that's not a pedagogical thought. We wouldn't use that for children, and we definitely wouldn't use that for all those college students in between childhood and adulthood. They need that social connection there. So while this may work really well at the graduate level, I don't know if the same thing would work without some social scaffolding to make it possible for lower levels. Yeah.
So is that what you were mainly thinking in terms of you doing this course, if you were to teach this course?
If I were teaching this course, I had a couple of other ideas. One of them was, it wasn't so much an idea that I had, but I had that same wondering. I had that same question about how to get some more social interaction between people without it making it feel trite or artificial. But I didn't have a genuine thought or a genuine path forward that I could think of aside from discussion triads. But I hate discussion triads, to be completely honest, because I really value hearing other people's input.
Absolutely.
You know, and if I get to the point by the end of the trimester, my school is on a trimester basis, so I keep saying trimester instead of semester. When we get to the end of the course, I can already predict what the people in my triad are going to say, just because I've interacted with them a lot. And while we can get to some pretty deep ideas, usually all of the big controversial topics or all the really deep digging is done by like week 3 or 4 in that limited of a scope of people. So I didn't really have a genuine idea of how to move forward. Some of the ideas I had for changing little things about the class, though, were some little concrete things. And again, it really depends on the context of the class. If this class was done over the summer, like it is right here, 8-week course, there would actually be very little I would change about it, just because it's so rushed. It's so driving forward at a breakneck pace. It can be quite challenging. But if it were over a 16-week course or a 12-week course, I'd probably add in a lot more readings, but not big readings, though. Okay, at least what I would consider big readings. Usually I have a high threshold for reading, but usually there's a sweet spot of about 6 to 8 pages, depending on the reading level. If we're talking academic studies, 6 to 8 pages, 10 tops. If it's light, maybe a little bit higher on the page number. But I'm definitely, you and I are a little bit like-minded in how we're very empirically driven. I'd like to read a couple more empirical studies, especially if they're controversial, so you could really dig in and then maybe debate or say, no, this idea is wrong because of this, or no, it's really right because of this. You're not taking that into account. What about this theory of motivation? And really dig deep with some of this stuff.
I think, we both come at this from very traditional education backgrounds because and we even work in the same subject, which is kind of remarkable. So I think we have a very similar take in that way. But I know a lot of people in this course don't work in traditional education or don't have that background.
Yeah.
And I don't really know exactly for whom this class is supposed to serve, like if it's supposed to be used for and people who are pursuing education degrees, or if it's kind of being people are just coming from all different directions. I'm not actually sure.
I think it's mostly it's all directions, but I think it's just trying to get us to rethink what education could look like. And funny, enough about this, we love to really harp on the K-12 education system, but we're actually experimenting more in K-12 education than any other kind of education that's formally out there. Like if you think about business training out there in the for-profit world, okay, you know exactly what that's going to look like. It's either going to be a one and done, you sit and you go show up and then you're officially trained, or you're going to have this online training where you watch a bunch of videos and you click through the tests where it doesn't even matter if you get the tests wrong, because then it'll allow you to go back and get it right at a retake. I mean, it's pretty ridiculous. There are more rigid structures out there for adult education than what we're currently experiencing. And even we're rankling against the system.
Right. Maybe the hope is that like kind of percolate, like it, sprouts and hopefully
Yeah.
grows up, right? That if people enter a system that is rethinking and challenging, that maybe that's what they will expect when they go out into the workforce or into higher education.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's hard.
Well, it's hard because we're expected to be the change makers, but
Right.
ultimately we're also the ones being evaluated. And if
Hmm.
we make too much change, then we're seen as ineffective teachers. And
Right.
yeah.
But to get what you said a little bit a minute ago, when you were talking more about empirical uh, data driven articles, I'm totally that way too. And especially when I talk about this topic, I really try to use as much data as possible, because otherwise it's very easy to kind of just use platitudes
Hmm.
a lot of the time, especially with this topic of rethinking education. I mean, I love a TED talk as much as the next person, but it's really easy to just sort of be like, wouldn't it be great if, without really saying, okay, but show me that it's, especially as someone in traditional education, we know that it's very hard to see any change unless it's basically already been proven up,
Right.
down, sideways, that this is going to be the magic bullet. Because otherwise no one's going to want to put in all the effort. And so I'm the same way. And I wonder, part of me thinks that it would be good to have elements of that in this course, because then people who don't come with a traditional background in education, well, maybe can almost get some front loading. Like, I
Yeah.
know you and I both made reference to like Desi and Ryan's work
Right.
and motivation. And both of us were like, oh, someone said their names, because it was the only time it came up. And I'm sure there would be people who would say, well, that's because we don't need that anymore. Like, we're in the new frontier of education. But kind of thinking back to like the Remix Week, it's like, right, but we're standing on them, whether we
Right.
acknowledge it or not. Like, you don't have to know who they are, but
Well,
you are using their work.
there are so many quote unquote older ideas, and it's funny because Desi and Ryan, what was that? That was the
Not
80s.
old.
It wasn't even that long ago.
Right.
Anyways, there are so many older ideas out there, like John Dewey, this pillar of education that everyone talks about. If you actually sit down and read what the guy wrote, we're not doing that stuff at all. And all of it is talking about hands-on experience in education, a
Yes.
book that he wrote. I mean, it's all about doing this kind of stuff. And we view it as being a new idea.
Mm,
I mean, this
right,
is
because we're doing it on computers. So now
right. Well, I mean, of course, because we're doing it on computers, it seems like a new idea. But even if you take the computer away,
no.
that model of education would be groundbreaking even today, here and now.
Oh, yeah.
Even though he wrote about it back in that was the 40s, I think.
Mhm.
Please forgive me if I'm wrong on the
I
decade there,
don't
but
know.
it was a while ago.
Yeah. And similar to the Montessori model, because that's came up in last week's reading with
Yeah.
Brown, talking about play and play oriented. And one of our readings for this next week is all about play and play oriented and creativity. And it kind of feels like, well, this has been done. This has been done before.
Right.
We didn't just ignore these facets of education for the last 100 years. We did care very much about them. But,
They just all got pushed to the side.
right. I mean, if coming back at it, like if the pendulum's swinging back this direction, means that we re-examine it and then really do dedicate ourselves to it, great.
Well,
Great.
the one problem with this, and I'm sure you could appreciate this too, all of these different ideas about education, like game-based education and inquiry-based learning, play-based learning, entrepreneurial mindset, or entrepreneurial education, we can speak to how well they work in a qualitative way. You can see and how these people have developed, and they can speak for themselves by the time they're out of it about how they can think so much more deeply and abstractly and critically about a situation. But when push comes to shove and it's time to measure that, how do you measure that growth? We
Mm-hmm.
haven't had the tools to do that in the past, and I'm crossing my fingers for the next couple of decades of neuroscience, and we actually might be able to measure how connections are formed and strengthened and trimmed through fMRI and other deeper ways of measuring it. Because, man, this whole we're going to measure you by a fill in the blank style of test,
Right.
it captures such I mean, you as a music educator, well, we
Oh,
as music educators, we know that that captures so little of what a child knows and is able to do, you
right.
know?
And I would love to see that the change in education actually takes place at that level, at the high stakes standardized testing level, or
Yeah.
actually deciding, how do we decide if someone is college ready or world ready or whatever the next step is, and really rethinking what that looks like, which happens, like you were saying, it's already happening in a lot of places, and yet it's kind of out in the real world. It's kind of when business gets involved, right?
Yeah.
Because Pearson is kind of
Right.
dictating our lives.
I actually think now, maybe I'm totally wrong on this, but I actually think the bigwigs at Pearson probably would be very much for it if there was a way that they could
We could
test
assess
it
it,
and then sell the test for it,
right? No,
Um,
you're probably right. And in many ways, actually, I'm not an anti-park person. I don't know if you use park in your state, but we do. Um,
I was in Colorado before this. This is my first year back in Michigan, but
oh,
so
okay.
I'm unfortunately very familiar with Park.
I actually don't really mind park. Like, I did
Yeah,
some analysis of it, and I actually think in terms of high stakes standardized tests that it's not that bad. I mean, it really is asking so much better things of kids than we were asking on the TCAP or the CSAP or pick
yeah,
those past iterations. Um, but wouldn't it be so nice if students had to demonstrate things or create things as part of these
yeah.
big, meaningful assessments?
Well, that's what this class is all about. But
Right.
how do you measure that?
Yeah. Like, I
And
mean, that's exactly what Brad's doing, because he's not measuring it either, because he talks about how it's about your growth and your development, which I agree. It should be. I think that's
right,
really good. And that people in this course talked about how they were afraid to do things because of judgment. And I actually was not afraid at all, even though I
yeah,
have no skills in all these areas, because I thought, whatever. I just have to get better. Like, that's not that big of a deal. I have to just improve.
right,
That freed me up so much, and thinking about what that could do for students is kind of mind-blowing. And it's such a,
yeah.
like you said, it's a simple idea. We're not reinventing the wheel here. Like,
Well, we're in this day and age of hyper accountability for educators, and every educator needs to show a median growth rate of blah 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 blah, so we know that they're effective and they belong in the school district. Blah blah blah. How do you do that for something like a project like this? I mean, I know you can make rubrics and everything, but does that really capture the spirit of how much that kid has learned? I, I would argue no.
right.
Yeah,
No. Yeah. Well, I think I'm afraid to go too much longer, because otherwise I don't think anyone's going to listen to any more of it. But
probably not. Are there any other things that you would change? Like, because I could always edit in or edit out stuff. And
oh, I don't think so. Like, you kind of mentioned a little bit with the content. I mentioned this in some of my reflections, and my personal soapbox is I do a lot of speaking about games in education.
mhm,
So that's like my personal platform, that I believe very strongly that we need to learn from games, that we specifically need to learn from the motivational aspects of games and use those when we rethink classroom and curricular structure. So when we kind of started to veer into that last week with talking about like gaming literacy and that kind of thing, my ears kind of perked up, and I thought, oh, finally. But it didn't quite go where I wanted it to. So I keep waiting for the day where where there's kind of this truly organic involvement of game structure in classrooms. And that's how I got involved with it at all, because I was waiting for someone to do it and no one did it. So I decided to do it.
yeah,
So I wish we had delved a little bit more into that. But I think that becomes almost a whole other course, because a lot of people are not game literate. And so you have to do, like you were saying, almost academic backtracking. You have to do a lot of like hands-on and exploring what things are. So
yeah.
yeah, might just be a different course, a different time.
Maybe. Although I don't think Brad would be opposed to that, though.
Yeah, I don't think so. Anything else you'd add?
Um, everything that I think of, every single time I think I have an idea for how I'd improve this course, I think of a million other ideas or a million reasons why my idea is a really bad idea. He has his tool list. I can't remember the website's name, but all these great tools that you can go to. And for some of them, like I know a good handful of them really, really well. Like I know how to use Audacity
Right.
pretty strongly, mostly because of my technical and musical background. I've had to use it a lot. But that's not an easy program to use. It's
No.
not at all intuitive at first unless you're used to working with audio software. And I think to myself, oh, if there was this tutorial that it was hyperlinked to, a crash course on how to use Audacity, that'd be great. But then how often do we end up with dead links on sites, and just because this tutorial is taken down or this web page was moved? And it would almost have to be curated as a class project, an ongoing thing, just to keep everything live and active. That was about the best thing I could think of as far as support structures for the course.
Yeah, that or you have to have your hand in it. Like,
Yeah.
You have to do it all just to ensure that it'll always be there and be the structure that you really want it to be. But then it's not as open.
Right. And that's a lot of weight on the instructor's shoulders to have to rebuild everything every single time, check every single link regularly. Yeah, I don't think I'd want that pressure on my shoulders.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that might be take a page out of the Len Scrogan playbook and make the class do it.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, it's not about, I mean, you have to learn it pretty well to be able to make a how-to, so wouldn't be bad. Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, so just for me, it's the readings, a couple of more empirical studies, and yeah, just more class interaction.
Yeah, I echo that. And maybe changing the structure to do that, maybe not, but I would love for a class that's so forward thinking and talks about like how everything is kind of always circling back on itself. I just think it would be nice to echo that in the structure of the course itself. Especially if we're kind of thinking about what education can look like. I don't think education is always going to look very linear when we look at the future. So, yeah.
Oh, one other here, I can splice this back in the video if need be, but this is a personal gripe that I have right here. I hate Twitter. I hate Twitter. I love how it connects us and all of its affordances. I absolutely love. I'm just too damn long-winded for Twitter. 140 killer characters kills me. I want to have a discussion, people, not a billboard or a bumper sticker for my thoughts, Yeah. And I think that kind of holds us back from really digging in and communicating, because everything has to be just a 1 sentence or 2 sentence idea. Hey, check this out. Oh, look at that. Squirrel over there. Ooh, look, that's shiny.
Right. Yeah, and you see, like, because now it's so popular, people push against it because they have Twitter threads that are like 50 long.
Mm-hmm.
So it ends up being a substantive train of thought of ideas. But I'm sure eventually we'll just swing back, and pretty soon we'll like all be on MySpace writing blogs again.
Right. I've thought about being that one jerk that's going to co-opt the entire thing by typing up a huge long post and converting it into a picture.
Well, people do that.
And I know, but little, just like this really long post,
like
and then
Infinite Jest is sitting there and one like footnotes and all.
Right. Here's my abstract.
Right. Here's my dissertation.
Right. Exactly.
Well, it would breaking new ground.
There you go. There you go.
All right. Well, with that, we found a new way to use the internet, and so I think we can probably call it there. So I'm going to stop the recording. Unless you have anything else you want to add.
Nah, I think that's good.
All right. Brian and Ashley signing off.